A thrilling story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings. She was pure, innocent, and full of faith until she was hired as a nanny by a man who didn't know how to love. But on the first rainy night, she woke up in his bed with no memory of how she got there. Watch this story until the end. You'll be surprised. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. The cutting mountain wind always carried the scent of pine, trees, and broken promises. Emily Marie Sanders adjusted the crocheted shawl over her shoulders as she walked through the narrow hallway of the house where she had grown up, her steps muffled by the worn carpet that her grandmother insisted on, keeping since her youth. Every object in that home told a story of sacrifice and unwavering faith, from the hand-carved wooden crucifix that dominated the living room wall to the yellowed photographs that witnessed decades of a simple but dignified life. At 22, Emily carried on her shoulders the weight of a responsibility she had never chosen. Cancer had been merciless with Mrs. Grace, transforming the strong and determined woman who had raised her into a fragile shadow of herself. The doctors spoke of weeks, perhaps a few months if there was a miracle. Emily no longer believed in miracles, only in bills to pay and expensive medications that drained her meager savings like sand between her fingers. The proposal had arrived on a rainy March afternoon through an old acquaintance of her grandmother who worked at an employment agency in the city, nanny for 2 children, complete accommodations, generous salary, wealthy family in an isolated property in the Adirondack Mountains. "He's a single man, recently widowed," Mrs. Martha had explained over the phone, her voice carrying a caution that Emily couldn't quite interpret. "The children need special care after losing their mother. Do you have experience with childhood trauma?" Emily had lied. Of course she had experience. Every orphaned child knows trauma by instinct. It's something you learn by breathing. What she didn't say was that her own childhood had been built on pillars of silence and half-truths, that she had grown up believing she was the daughter of a saint and the granddaughter of a martyr, 2 women who sacrificed everything for love and devotion. Her mother, Hope, had died when she was only 3, victim of a mysterious fever that doctors at the time couldn't treat. All that remained was a box of perfumed letters and a pearl rosary that Mrs. Grace kept as a sacred relic. The bus trip to Lake Placid lasted 4 hours that seemed like an eternity. Emily observed the landscape change through the foggy window, the simple country houses giving way to colonial mansions and the verdant mountains that embraced the imperial town. She carried only an old leather suitcase and a bag with her few belongings. Some books, modest but well-kept clothes, her mother's box of letters, and the rosary she never abandoned. Her hands trembled slightly, not from cold, but from an anxiety that grew with every mile traveled. The taxi that picked her up at the bus station traveled increasingly deserted secondary roads until reaching an iron gate that seemed taken from a Gothic tale. The property extended beyond what the eye could see, a sea of green dotted with century-old trees that whispered secrets to the wind. The main house rose majestically in the center of the grounds, a modern construction of stone and glass that contrasted with the wild nature around it. It was beautiful in an almost disturbing way, as if someone had decided to tame the impossible. Emily paid the taxi driver with her last bills and walked slowly toward the main entrance, her flat shoes making a hollow sound against the stones of the path. The door opened before she could even ring the bell, revealing a tall, elegant man who observed her with a disconcerting intensity. Robert Sullivan had the appearance of someone who carried the world on his shoulders, but refused to bend under the weight. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had run his hands through it repeatedly, and there was a deep sadness in his brown eyes that no courteous smile could mask. "You must be Emily," he said, and his voice was deep, modulated, carrying a New York accent softened by years of refined education. "I'm Robert Sullivan, welcome." He extended his hand to greet her, and when their fingers touched, Emily felt an electric shock run up her arm. It was as if her entire life had been lived in black and white, and suddenly someone had turned on the colors. Robert also seemed to feel something, because his eyes narrowed slightly, and he maintained the handshake for a few seconds longer than would be appropriate. "Thank you for receiving me, Mr. Sullivan," she replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I'm eager to meet the children." He led her through wide hallways decorated with modern works of art that Emily vaguely recognized from her readings about culture. The walls were high and the windows enormous, creating a play of light and shadow that transformed each room into a theatrical stage. There was something cinematic about that house, as if each environment had been carefully designed to tell a specific story. "Anna is 9 and Michael is 7, Robert explained as they walked. "Since they lost their mother 6 months ago, they've been showing some atypical behaviors. Nightmares, separation anxiety, episodes of mutism. The child psychologist recommended they have a constant female figure nearby, someone who could offer emotional stability." Emily nodded, trying to absorb the information while fighting against the strange sensation that she already knew that house. There was something familiar about the angles of the walls, the arrangement of the furniture, as if she had walked through those corridors in forgotten dreams. They arrived at a spacious living room where 2 children were sitting on the floor playing silently with building blocks. Anna was a thin girl with almost white blonde hair, tied in 2 braids that framed an angelic face marked by large, melancholy eyes. Michael seemed like a male version of his sister, with the same paleness and the same cautious expression of someone who learned too early that the world can collapse without warning. "Children," said Robert, and his voice softened in a way that made Emily's heart tighten. "This is Emily. She's going to take care of you from today on." Anna slowly raised her eyes, studying Emily with an intensity that shouldn't exist in a 9-year-old child. Michael hid behind his sister, only his dark eyes visible over her shoulder. "Hi," said Emily, lowering herself to their height. "What? A beautiful construction you've made. Is it a castle?" "It's Mum's house," answered Anna with a clear, direct voice that contrasted with her fragile appearance. "She lives there now." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. She quickly looked at Robert, who had tensed his jaw and closed his fists. "Anna," he said softly, "we've already talked about this. Mom doesn't live anywhere. She went to heaven." "I know where she lives," the girl insisted, her blue eyes shining with a disturbing conviction. "Michael knows too. She visits us at night." The silence that followed was dense and uncomfortable. Emily could feel tension emanating from Robert like heat waves, and the children seemed divided between fear and obstinacy. She decided to break the moment with a genuine smile. "Well, maybe you can show me the rest of the house later," she said. "I'm sure there are many interesting places to explore." Michael finally came out from behind his sister and took a few steps toward Emily. There was something in the way he observed her that made her uneasy, as if he was seeing through her, reaching parts of her soul that she herself didn't know. "You look like someone," he said, and his voice was almost a whisper. "Someone I know." "Michael," Robert interrupted with a firmness that bordered on harshness. "Enough. You 2 go to your rooms now. Emily needs to get settled." The children obeyed, without protest, but Emily noticed how Anna gave her brother a meaningful look before they left. It was as if they shared a secret that not even their father knew. Robert led her to a room on the 2nd floor, a spacious and well-lit space with a view of the back garden. The decoration was simple but elegant, clearly feminine, with soft tones of blue and white that created a serene atmosphere. "This was the guest room when Isabella was alive," he explained, avoiding her gaze. "She liked to receive artist friends who came to spend time here. I hope it's comfortable." "It's perfect," Emily responded sincerely. "Thank you for the hospitality." He lingered at the door as if he wanted to say something more but couldn't find the right words. Emily took the opportunity to observe him better. Robert must have been about 35, maybe 40, and there was a natural elegance about him that transcended the expensive clothes and impeccable haircut. It was the elegance of someone born knowing exactly what place they occupied in the world, but who now seemed lost in their own territory. "Dinner is served at 7, he said finally. "The children have dinner at 6. You can accompany them, or dine with me later as you prefer." The way he said "with me" carried an intimacy that made Emily blush slightly. "Maybe it's better if I accompany the children for the first few days," she replied. Until we get used to each other. He nodded, but there was something in his eyes that suggested disappointment. Of course, that makes sense. When he left, Emily sat on the soft bed and tried to organize her thoughts. There was something about that house that made her uneasy, an energy that pulsed in the walls like a gigantic heart. And there was something about Robert Sullivan that awakened in her sensations she had never experienced before, a warmth that started in her chest and spread through her body like melted honey. She unpacked her few clothes and arranged them in the spacious wardrobe, feeling like an intruder amid the luxury that surrounded her. When she opened her mother's box of letters to store it in the bedside table drawer, one of the letters slipped and fell to the floor. Emily picked it up carefully, noticing that the envelope was addressed not to her mother, but to a certain Hope Sullivan. The blood froze in her veins. Sullivan, the same surname as Robert. With trembling hands, she opened the letter and read the first lines written in a delicate, feminine handwriting. My dear sister, I still miss you every day. Sometimes I wake up thinking I'll find you in the kitchen, making coffee as we did when we were girls. The letter was signed by I. Sullivan. Emily let herself fall into the armchair by the window, her mind spinning in confused circles. Her mother's name was Hope, and she had a sister named I. Sullivan, Isabella Sullivan. Robert's deceased wife was her mother's sister. This would explain the feeling of familiarity with the house, how Michael said she looked like someone, the way Robert observed her, as if he was seeing a ghost. But it also raised 1,000 new and disturbing questions. Why had Mrs. Grace never mentioned the existence of a sister? Why did her mother have the Sullivan surname if she wasn't married? And most importantly, what did it mean for her to be there, taking care of the children of the woman who might have been her aunt? The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of automatic activities. Emily met the cook, Mrs. Rose, a friendly lady in her 60s, who had been working for the family for more than a decade. She also met the gardener, Mr. Jack, who cared for the extensive gardens of the property with the affection of someone who treats each plant like a child. Mrs. Isabella was quite an artist, commented Mrs. Rose while preparing the children's dinner. She spent hours in her studio painting pictures that gave you chills just looking at them. She had a peculiar imagination. Did she have a studio here in the house? Asked Emily, trying to sound casual. Still does. Mr. Robert hasn't touched anything since she passed. Says he doesn't have the courage. It's on the 3rd floor, in a room with a view of the mountains. Sometimes we can still smell the paint from there. Emily filed this information, along with so many others that were beginning to form a puzzle whose pieces didn't quite fit. Dinner with the children was a surreal experience. Anna and Michael ate in silence, casting furtive glances at Emily as if they were evaluating some kind of secret test. The food was delicious, but Emily could barely taste the flavor. Her mind was too busy processing the day's revelations. Emily, said Anna suddenly, have you seen the lady in white? The question was asked with such naturalness that Emily almost choked on her juice. The lady in white? She walks through the hallways at night, explained Michael as if he were talking about the weather. Sometimes she stops at our door and stands watching. Children, Emily tried to keep her voice calm. Sometimes our imagination plays tricks on us when we're sad or afraid. It's normal after losing someone we love very much. It's not imagination, insisted Anna. Dad has seen her too. That's why he doesn't sleep well. Emily looked at the two children and saw something in their eyes that made her swallow the words of comfort she was about to pronounce. It wasn't fantasy or trauma. It was the absolute certainty of someone who had witnessed something inexplicable. After dinner, she helped the children with their bath and put them to bed. Their room was at the end of the hallway, decorated with colorful drawings and scattered toys that tried to create a cheerful atmosphere but couldn't completely disguise the melancholy that permeated the house. Emily, Michael called her when she was about to turn off the light. Mom liked you. What do you mean, sweetheart? She drew you many times in the studio even before you came here. Emily's heart raced. Are you sure about that? Anna propped herself up on her elbow and looked at her with those penetrating blue eyes. She said you would come to take care of us when she couldn't anymore. She said you were special. Emily spent several minutes standing at the door after leaving the children's room, trying to process what she had just heard. How was it possible that Isabella knew of her existence before they had even met? How could she have drawn her if they had never met? She descended the stairs with hesitant steps, knowing she should go straight to her room, but feeling irresistibly drawn to the room where she had heard Robert moving about. She found him in the library, sitting in a leather armchair before a lit fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, and a closed book in his lap. "Did the children sleep well?" he asked, raising his eyes when she appeared at the door. "Yes. They're special children. Very mature for their age." "Too mature," he agreed with a sigh. "Sometimes I wish they could go back to being just children." Emily approached slowly, noticing how the firelight danced on his face, softening the lines of fatigue around his eyes. "May I ask a question?" "Of course." "Your wife, did she have sisters?" Robert visibly stiffened, and Emily saw his fingers tighten around the glass. "Why do you ask?" "It's just that I found some old letters among my mother's belongings, letters signed by someone with the surname Sullivan. I thought that maybe—" "What was your mother's name?" His voice was strangely tense. Hope Sanders, at least that's what I knew." Robert stood up abruptly, almost dropping the glass. He walked to the window, turning his back to her, his shoulders rigid with tension. "Isabella had a younger sister," he said finally, his voice low and controlled. "Hope. They had a falling out when they were young and never spoke again. Isabella always blamed herself for that." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily felt the blood pulsing in her ears, the floor seeming to oscillate beneath her feet. "So I am her niece. And to the children, you're their cousin." Robert turned to face her, and there was something in his eyes that she couldn't decipher. Isabella always knew that Hope had a daughter. She spent years trying to find her. Why did she never succeed? "Because your grandmother changed her name and moved to the countryside after your mother died. She didn't want Isabella to find you." Emily sat heavily in a chair, her mind struggling to process all this information. Why? Why would my grandmother do that? Robert hesitated, as if weighing how much of the truth he should reveal. "Because she blamed Isabella for your mother's death. And maybe she was right." The night that followed was the longest in Emily's life. She remained awake until the early hours of the morning, pacing around the room, trying to fit the pieces of a puzzle that seemed to grow with each new revelation. Her entire life had been built on lies and omissions. Her identity, her family history, even her presence in that house were not coincidences, but parts of a destiny that someone had orchestrated long before she was born. When she finally fell, asleep, her dreams were populated by figures in white who walked through endless corridors, whispering secrets in a language she almost understood, but not quite. And at the center of all these dreams was Robert Sullivan, observing her with those dark eyes that seemed to know all her secrets before she even discovered them. Dawn arrived carrying a dense fog that transformed the property into a ghostly world. Emily woke with the sensation that she had slept only a few minutes, but the clock on the bedside table marked 6:30 in the morning. Her body ached as if she had fought a battle during the night, and fragments of disturbing dreams still pulsed in her mind like open wounds. She got up slowly, walking to the window to observe the garden enveloped by the morning mist. There was something hypnotic about the way the fog moved between the trees, creating shapes that looked like human figures walking silently across the grounds. For an instant, Emily was certain she saw a woman in a white dress standing near the artificial lake, but when she blinked, there was nothing but a branch swaying in the wind. The hot shower helped dissipate the tension in her muscles, but couldn't calm the storm forming in her mind. As she dressed in one of the simple dresses she had brought, a navy blue fabric that enhanced the color of her eyes, Emily tried to organize the revelations of the previous night. She was the niece of Isabella Sullivan, cousin to the children she now cared for, and her presence in that house was not a coincidence, but part of a plan orchestrated by a dead woman. She went downstairs to the kitchen, following the aroma of fresh coffee and homemade bread. Mrs. Rose was already active, preparing breakfast with the efficiency of someone who knows every detail of the family routine. "Good morning." "Dear," the cook greeted her with a warm smile. "Did you sleep well on your first night?" "Reasonably," lied Emily, accepting the cup of coffee that Mrs. Rose offered her. "The house is very quiet." "Quiet?" Mrs. Rose raised an eyebrow. "This house was never quiet, my child, especially after Mrs. Isabella, well, after she left us. Sometimes I have the impression that she's still walking around, messing with her paints and brushes." Emily almost choked on her coffee. "Do you believe in ghosts?" "I believe there are things in this world that science can't explain," replied Mrs. Rose, lowering her voice as if fearing to be heard. "Mrs. Isabella was a very special woman, very intense. It wouldn't surprise me if she were still here, looking after her family." The children came down for breakfast still sleepy, Anna with disheveled hair and Michael carrying a teddy bear worn by time. There was something touching in the way they behaved, too independent for their age, but still carrying vestiges of the childhood that refused to be completely extinguished. "Good morning," greeted Emily, noticing how Michael approached her, naturally as if her presence were familiar and comforting. "Are you going to stay forever?" asked the boy, looking at her with those dark eyes that so much resembled his father's. "I'll stay as long as you need me," replied Emily, affectionately stroking his hair. "Mom said you would stay forever," declared Anna with that disconcerting certainty that had already become her trademark. "She said you would take care of us and Dad too." A chill ran down Emily's spine. "When did your mother say that, Anna?" "In dreams," replied the girl simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "She comes in our dreams and tells stories." Mrs. Rose discreetly made the sign of the cross, muttering a quiet prayer. Emily decided not to press the subject, but filed this information along with all the other pieces of the puzzle that her life had become. Robert came down shortly after, impeccably dressed in a dark suit that enhanced his natural elegance, but Emily noticed the deep circles under his eyes and how his hands trembled slightly when he picked up the coffee cup. He looked like a man who hadn't slept properly for months. "Good morning," he said, and his voice carried a studied formality that hadn't existed the night before. "I hope you all slept well." Their eyes met for a moment, loaded with meaning, and Emily felt again that disturbing electricity that seemed to flow between them whenever they approached. There was something in Robert's eyes that made her feel as if she were being undressed, not physically but emotionally, as if he could see through all her defenses to reach parts of her soul that she herself didn't know. "The children have piano." "Lessons at 9, he informed, addressing mainly Emily. "The teacher comes 3 times a week. In the afternoons they have free activities, but they like to play in the garden when the weather permits." "And you?" The question escaped Emily's lips before she could contain it. "What is your routine?" Robert hesitated as if the question had caught him off guard. "I work in the office in the morning. I have some architectural projects in progress that can be conducted remotely. In the afternoon, it depends on the day." There was something evasive in his response, as if he were omitting important information. Emily decided not to insist, at least not in front of the children. The morning passed quickly. Emily accompanied Anna and Michael during their piano lesson, impressed with the natural talent both demonstrated. The teacher, an elegant lady in her 50s named Mrs. Clare, commented that the children had inherited their mother's musical ear. "Isabella played divinely," she said, when the children went out to play in the garden. "Sometimes I would hear her playing late at night, melancholy melodies that seemed to come straight from the soul. After she died, the piano fell silent. Even the children only started playing again a few weeks ago." "A few weeks ago," Emily frowned, "but I just arrived." Yes, it was strange indeed, as if they were preparing for something. Mrs. Clare carefully put away the sheet music. Or for someone. After lunch, Robert disappeared into his office, and Emily was left alone with the children. They seemed restless, exchanging significant looks, as if they shared an important secret. "Emily," said Anna finally, "do you want to see Mum's studio?" Emily's heart raced. It was exactly what she wanted, but she knew it was probably forbidden. Would your father allow it? He doesn't need to know, replied Michael with a disturbing wisdom. Mom wants you to see. Against her better judgment, Emily let herself be led by the children through the house to a narrow staircase that led to the third floor. As they climbed, the air became denser, charged with a peculiar aroma that mixed paint, varnish, and something else indefinable, perhaps materialized longing. Isabella's studio occupied a large room with windows facing the mountain, providing a spectacular view that extended to the horizon, but Emily barely noticed the landscape. Her attention was immediately captured by the dozens of canvases scattered throughout the room, some finished, others merely sketched, all emanating an emotional intensity that was almost palpable. Isabella's works were not conventional. There were distorted portraits of people who seemed to be silently screaming, landscapes that looked more like feverish, dreams and female figures that danced between reality and nightmare. But what most disturbed Emily were Isabella's self-portraits, dozens of them, showing a woman of devastating beauty being consumed by a darkness that seemed to grow from picture to picture. There, said Anna, pointing to a corner of the room where several canvases were covered by white cloths. That's where the drawings of you are. With trembling hands, Emily approached and pulled the cloth from the first canvas. What she saw made her retreat as if she had been punched in the stomach. It was her face, painted with a photographic precision. That left no doubt about the model's identity. But it wasn't just a common portrait. There was something in the painted eyes that suggested knowledge, as if Isabella had captured not just her physical appearance, but the essence of her soul. Emily pulled the cloths from the other canvases, revealing an entire gallery dedicated to her. There were charcoal drawings showing her at different ages, as a child, a teenager, and as she was now. There were paintings where she appeared in situations she had never lived, walking through the property's gardens, playing with children. She now recognized as Anna and Michael, and in one of the most disturbing, embraced with a man whose face was obscured by shadows, but whose silhouette was unmistakably that of Robert. "How is this possible?" murmured Emily, her voice coming out as a haunted whisper. "How did she know what I looked like?" "Mom saw many things," explained Michael with that disconcerting seriousness. "She said that some people are special, that they can see beyond the veil." Anna approached one of the paintings, the one where Emily appeared embraced with Robert, and pointed to something in the lower right corner. There was a date, 3 years ago, 3 years before Emily even knew of the existence of that family. "Mom painted this when she knew she was going to die," said the girl. "She said you would come to take care of us when she couldn't anymore." Emily leaned against the wall, feeling her legs weaken. The reality she knew continued to crumble piece by piece, revealing something much more complex and disturbing than she had ever imagined. "Have you told your father about these paintings?" The children exchanged a complicit look. "He never wanted to see," replied Anna. "Said it hurt too much to be here." Emily walked slowly around the studio, observing each detail, trying to understand what Isabella Sullivan knew about her and how it was possible to have this knowledge. In a corner of the room, she found a diary bound in red leather. Her hands hesitated over the cover before opening it. The first pages contained notes about painting techniques and ideas for artistic projects, but as she advanced, the content became more personal and disturbing. Isabella wrote about recurring dreams with a young woman with brown hair and blue eyes who would arrive to complete the circle. She described visions where she saw this young woman taking care of her children and bringing peace to Robert. One passage in particular made Emily's blood freeze. "I dreamed of hope again. She finally forgave me, but said the price of forgiveness would be high. Her daughter would come, yes, but not as we thought. She would come when I was no longer here to protect her. And Robert will fall in love with her, as he never fell in love with me. It's fair, I suppose. It's what I deserve for causing my sister's death." Emily abruptly closed the diary, her heart beating so hard that she was sure the children could hear it. Each new revelation raised more questions, creating a web of mysteries that seemed endless. "We need to go downstairs," she said, her voice coming out higher than intended. "Your father can't find out we were here." But when they turned to leave, they found Robert standing at the door of the studio, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. There was anger there, yes, but also something that seemed like relief, as if a burden he had carried for a long time had finally been shared. "I told you not to come up here," he said, but his voice didn't carry the harshness Emily expected. "Especially you two," he added, looking at the children. "It was my fault," Emily hastened to say. "I asked to see—" "No," Robert interrupted her, slowly entering the studio as if he were walking through a minefield. "It's not your fault. I should have come up here a long time ago." His eyes scanned the uncovered paintings, lingering on the one where Emily appeared in his arms. The expression on his face was impossible to decipher, a mixture of pain, awe, and something deeper that Emily didn't dare to name. "How do you feel seeing this?" he asked, approaching the painting. "Confused," admitted Emily. "Scared. How did she know?" Isabella was always special. She saw things that others didn't. Say knew things she shouldn't know. Robert ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that Emily was beginning to recognize as a sign of extreme tension. "In the last months before she died, she became obsessed with the idea that you would come. She spent hours up here, painting, writing, preparing. Preparing. For what?" Robert hesitated, looking at the children who were observing the conversation with that intense attention that characterized them. "Anna, Michael, go play downstairs. The adults need to talk." They obeyed without protesting, but Emily noticed how Anna whispered something in her brother's ear before they left. When they were alone, the atmosphere in the studio became electrified, charged with a tension that went far beyond the mystery of the paintings. "Preparing for what, Robert?" Emily repeated the question. He approached her slowly, so much that Emily could feel the heat emanating from his body, the aroma of his cologne mixed with something more masculine and primitive that made her want to get even closer. "To replace her," he said, his voice low and husky. "Isabella knew she was dying months before the official diagnosis, and she knew that I would fall in love with you." The silence that followed was dense and loaded with possibilities. Emily could hear her own heart beating. She could feel the intensity of Robert's gaze on her like a physical caress. "This is madness," she murmured, but her voice didn't carry conviction. "Is it?" Robert came a step closer, and now she could see the small lines around his eyes, could count each dark eyelash. "Don't you feel it, this connection between us, as if we've known each other for a lifetime?" Emily knew she should back away, should maintain the professional distance that the situation demanded, but there was something magnetic about Robert Sullivan that disarmed all her defenses. Perhaps it was the pain he carried in his eyes, or the way he treated his children with a tenderness that contrasted with his cold appearance, or perhaps it was something more primitive, an attraction that transcended logic and reason. "I can't," she whispered. "It's not right. I work for you. I take care of your children. And does that make our feelings any less real?" His hand rose slowly, stopping a few inches from her face, as if he were asking permission to touch her. Emily closed her eyes, fighting against the impulse to lean toward that unconsummated caress. When she opened them again, she found Robert, observing her with an intensity that made her tremble. "Emily," he said, and there was something in his voice that sounded like a prayer. "I didn't want this to happen. I fought against it from the moment you entered this house, but Isabella was right, as always." What else was she right about? The question came out in a whisper. "About the fact that you would be my salvation and my downfall." Before Emily could fully process the meaning of those words, Robert closed the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that began hesitantly, almost reverently, as if he were touching something sacred. But it quickly intensified, becoming urgent, desperate, charged with months of solitude and repressed desire. Emily found herself responding to the kiss with a passion she didn't know she possessed, her hands clinging to his shoulders as if it were the only thing preventing her from drowning. There was something in Robert's touch that awakened parts of her that had never been touched, not just physically, but emotionally. When they finally separated, both were breathless. Robert rested his forehead on hers, eyes closed as if he were fighting against an internal pain. "I'm sorry," he murmured. I shouldn't have— Don't apologize, Emily interrupted him, surprised by her own courage. Unless you're regretting it. He opened his eyes and looked at her with an intensity that made her melt inside. Regret. Emily, what I'm regretting is having waited so long. They remained like that for long moments, breathing the same air, sharing the same space, as if the world out there had ceased to exist. But reality always finds a way to impose itself, and it was the sound of footsteps on the stairs that brought them back to the present. Robert moved away quickly, running, his hands through his hair in an attempt to regain his composure. Emily smoothed her dress with trembling hands, trying not to appear so obviously affected by what had just happened. Mrs. Rose appeared at the door of the studio, breathless from the climb. "Mr. Robert," she said, and there was urgency in her voice. "There's someone at the door asking for Emily. An older lady said she's her grandmother." Emily's blood froze. Mrs. Grace. Here. How did she know where to find me? She murmured, more to herself than to the others. Robert and Emily exchanged a look loaded with meaning. Her grandmother's arrival couldn't be a coincidence, not after all she had discovered about the connection between the families. Mrs. Grace had come to get her, and Emily was sure it wouldn't be a friendly visit. "I'll go down to receive her," said Robert, his voice returning to the formal and controlled tone. "Maybe it's better if you take a moment to prepare." Emily nodded, watching him leave the studio with determined steps. When she was alone, she allowed herself a moment of weakness, leaning against the wall and bringing her fingers to her lips, still feeling the taste of Robert's kiss. Everything was changing too fast. In less than 48 hours, her entire life had been turned upside down. She had discovered a family she didn't know existed, had fallen in love with a man who should have been out of her reach, and now would face the woman who had built her life on lies and omissions. She looked once more at Isabella's paintings, especially the one where she appeared in Robert's arms. There was something prophetic in that image, as if destiny were a wheel that turned independently of her choices. With a deep sigh, Emily headed for the stairs. It was time to face the past that had come to seek her. But as she descended the steps toward the inevitable confrontation, a certainty grew in her chest. No matter what Mrs. Grace said or did, she would not leave that house. She would not leave the children she was beginning to love as if they were her own. And she definitely would not leave Robert. Destiny had brought her here, and she would fight to stay. The front door was open when Emily reached the ground floor, and through it she could see the familiar silhouette of Mrs. Grace talking with Robert in the garden. Her grandmother seemed smaller than she remembered, more fragile, but there was something in her posture that still emanated the iron authority that Emily knew well. It was time to discover what secrets her grandmother still kept, and it was time to fight for the future she had just discovered she wanted. The meeting with Mrs. Grace took place in the visiting room, a formal environment decorated with antique furniture and works of art that testified to Isabella's refined good taste. Emily entered the room feeling as if she were walking toward her own judgment. Her grandmother was sitting rigidly in a blue velvet armchair, her back straight and hands intertwined over the black purse she always carried. At 78, Mrs. Grace still emanated an authority that made Emily feel again like a small child about to be reprimanded. Robert was standing near the window, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. There was a palpable tension in the air, as if everyone knew that conversation would change everything forever. "Emily Marie," said Mrs. Grace, and her voice carried all the coldness that Emily remembered. "I imagined I would find you here." "How did you know where to find me?" Emily asked, keeping herself standing near the door, as if she wanted to keep an escape route available. "I think I wouldn't investigate where my granddaughter disappeared to." The small, penetrating eyes of Mrs. Grace fixed on Robert, especially when I learned she was working for the Sullivans. The surname was pronounced with a venom that made Emily shudder. There was a history there, an old wound that had never completely healed. "Mr. Sullivan," Mrs. Grace addressed Robert with an icy courtesy, "I thank you for taking care of my granddaughter, but now she needs to return home. Immediately." "With all due respect, ma'am," Robert replied, his voice controlled but firm. "Emily is an adult woman. The decision to stay or go is hers, not mine or yours. The look that Mrs. Grace cast at Robert could melt steel. You know nothing about my granddaughter, young man. You don't know the dangers she faces being in this house, in this family. What dangers, Grandma? Emily finally found her voice, taking a step forward. What dangers you never told me about, like you never told me my mother had a sister, like you never told me my real surname was Sullivan. The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Grace visibly paled, her hands gripping the purse so tightly that her knuckles turned white. You don't understand, she murmured, and for the first time her voice carried a vulnerability that Emily had never heard before. I did everything to protect you, so that you would never have to carry the weight of this curse. What curse? Robert approached, his protective instinct clearly activated. What are you talking about? Mrs. Grace rose slowly, walking to the window as if she needed the support of natural light to continue. When she finally spoke, her voice was charged with a pain that spanned decades. The Sullivan women have a gift, she began, the words coming out as if each one were a weight she had carried for a long time. A cursed gift. They see things that haven't happened yet, feel the presence of the dead, connect with energies that shouldn't exist. Hope had this gift, Isabella too, and you, Emily, inherited from both. Emily felt the floor oscillate under her feet. That's ridiculous. I don't have any special gift. No? Mrs. Grace turned to face her. Then explain to me how you instinctively knew which room was yours in this house. How the children immediately felt connected. To you. How the employees commented that the atmosphere of the house changed since you arrived. Robert frowned. How do you know about the employees? Because I talked to them before coming here, Mrs. Grace answered with that brutal honesty. That had always characterized her. Mrs. Rose told me the children are sleeping better, that they stop crying at night. Mr. Jack mentioned that the flowers in the garden are blooming out of season since Emily arrived. And you, Mr. Sullivan, I bet you're having your first peaceful dreams in months. Emily looked at Robert, who had paled. The expression on his face confirmed every word Mrs. Grace had pronounced. How is it possible? Emily whispered. Because you're special, darling, a familiar voice said at the door. Anna and Michael had silently appeared, their small faces too serious for their age. Mum said you were special. Children, Robert began, but Anna interrupted him. Dad, you need to tell Emily about Mum's accident. She needs to know the truth. The blood froze in Emily's veins. What accident? Robert closed his eyes, as if gathering courage to open a wound that was still bleeding. Isabella didn't die of cancer, he said, his voice coming out hoarse. She died in a car accident, but it wasn't really an accident. What do you mean? Emily asked, although a part of her already knew that she didn't want to hear the answer. She was driving to find you, Mrs. Grace answered, and there were tears in her eyes for the first time since Emily had known her. Isabella finally discovered where you lived. She was going to get you when she lost control of the car on a dangerous curve. The revelation hit Emily like a punch to the stomach. She leaned against the wall, fighting against the nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. She died because of me? No, Robert said firmly, approaching her. She died because she was obsessed with something she couldn't control, because the gift of the Sullivan women comes with a price. What price? Emily asked, although she feared the answer. It was Michael who answered, with that haunted wisdom. That characterized him. The women in our family die young when they use the gift too much. Great-grandmother died at 25, Mum at 32, and your mother at 24, Mrs. Grace completed, tears now running freely down her face. Hope began to have visions when you were born. Visions about her sister, about the future, about you growing up in this house. She became obsessed, stopped eating, stopped sleeping. Her body simply gave up. Emily slid down the wall until she sat on the floor, her mind spinning in confused circles. Everything made sense now. Mrs. Grace's overprotection, the secrets, the name change, the isolation in the countryside. Her grandmother had tried to protect her from a destiny that seemed to pursue all the women of her lineage. But I don't have visions, she said, her voice coming out as a whisper. I don't see the dead. I don't predict the future. Not yet. Anna approached and knelt beside her. "But you will. Mom said your gift awakens when you truly fall in love." Emily's eyes met Robert's, and she saw there the same terror she felt. If Anna was right, if the gift really awakened with true love, then what had happened between them in the studio had sealed her fate. "No," Robert said, and there was desperation in his voice. "This won't happen. I won't allow Emily to suffer the same fate as Isabella." "And how do you intend to prevent it?" Mrs. Grace asked with bitterness. "Do you think you can fight against centuries of genetic inheritance, against forces that we don't even understand?" "I can try," he replied, and there was an iron determination in his voice that made Emily's heart accelerate. Mrs. Grace studied Robert for long moments, as if she were evaluating something invisible. Finally, she sighed deeply. "Maybe you can," she admitted. "Isabella believed you were special too, that you had some kind of natural protection against supernatural forces." "What are you talking about? Have you never wondered why you can sleep in this house when it's clearly haunted?" Mrs. Grace raised an eyebrow. "Why the presences that torment others leave you in peace? You have something that other men in the Sullivan family didn't have, a natural resistance to the supernatural." Emily observed Robert process this information, seeing the pieces fit together in his mind. It explained why he could function normally while others were disturbed by the atmosphere of the house, why the children felt safe with him even after, losing their mother in a traumatic way. "Mum said Dad was your shield," Michael spoke up, walking to his father and holding his hand. "She said that as long as he loved Emily truly, she would be protected." "But what if something happens to me?" Robert asked, and Emily saw the genuine fear in his eyes. "If I die, if I can't protect her anymore?" "Then you'll have to make sure that doesn't happen," Mrs. Grace replied with that brutal practicality, "because if Emily fully develops the gift and is left unprotected, she will die like all the others." The weight of this revelation fell on everyone, like a funeral mantle. Emily was trapped in a destiny she hadn't chosen, loving a man who had literally become her salvation and downfall, and Robert now carried the responsibility of keeping her alive through the power of his feelings. "I need fresh air," Emily murmured. Rising on trembling legs, she left the room before anyone could stop her, walking quickly through the house until she reached the back garden. The afternoon air was fresh and charged with the aroma of flowers that bloomed exuberantly, apparently confirming Mrs. Grace's words about her influence on nature. Robert followed her a few minutes later, finding her sitting on a stone bench near the artificial lake. He sat beside her, respecting her space but offering his presence as comfort. "I didn't want you to find out this way," he said softly. "Is there a good way to discover you're cursed?" Emily asked with a bitter laugh. "You're not cursed," Robert turned to face her, his voice loaded with conviction. "You are special, yes, but this is not a curse. Tell that to my mother, or to Isabella. Isabella died because she was desperate, not because she used the gift. She was taking unnecessary risks, driving dangerously because she wanted to find you at any cost." Robert took her hand gently. "And your mother? Maybe she died because she didn't have someone to protect her, someone like me." Emily studied his face, seeing the absolute sincerity in his eyes. "How can you be so sure?" "Because since you arrived here, everything has changed. The children are better, the house seems more alive, and I feel complete for the first time since Isabella died." He brought her hand to his lips, gently kissing her fingers. "You're not my curse, Emily. You're my redemption." They remained like that for long moments, hands intertwined, observing the reflection of the clouds on the calm surface of the lake. Emily felt a strange peace descending on her, as if all the pieces of a cosmic puzzle were finally fitting together. "Emily," Robert said softly, "there's something else you need to know." She looked at him, seeing a hesitation in his eyes that left her alert. "What?" "Last night, after our conversation in the library, I had a dream, a very vivid dream." He hesitated, as if he were carefully choosing his words. "I dreamed of you, but it wasn't really a common dream." "What do you mean?" "You were there in the dream, but you were also conscious, as if we were really meeting somewhere between sleep and wakefulness. Robert studied her face. "Do you remember? Any strange dream last night?" Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. She did remember, yes. She had dreamed she was walking through the corridors of the house, but the corridors were different, longer, with doors that led to impossible places. And Robert was there, waiting for her in a garden that didn't exist in reality. "You were in the garden," she whispered, "a garden with flowers that glowed in the dark. And you wore a white dress that seemed made of moonlight," he completed. "We talked for hours about things I couldn't remember when I woke up, but I remember the sensation of being connected to you in a way that transcended the physical." The revelation left them in contemplative silence. If they were sharing dreams, it meant that the connection between them was even deeper than they imagined. And it also meant that Emily's gift was already manifesting, just in a subtle way. "This is scary," Emily admitted. "It is," Robert agreed. "But it's also extraordinary. Think about it, Emily. How many people in the world can say they have such a deep connection that it transcends reality itself?" Before Emily could respond, they heard footsteps approaching. Anna and Michael appeared in the garden, followed by Mrs. Grace, who seemed to have aged a decade in the last few hours. "Emily," said her grandmother, and her voice carried a resignation. "That didn't exist before. I came here to take you away, but after talking with the children and observing you two together, maybe I was wrong." "What do you mean?" "Maybe true love really is the protection that the women of our family always needed. Maybe Hope and Isabella died, not because of the gift, but because of the absence of someone capable of anchoring them in reality." Mrs. Grace sat on another bench, suddenly looking very tired. "Robert has something that other men didn't have, a strength that balances the supernatural power of you, women." "Are you going to let Emily stay?" asked Anna, her blue eyes shining with hope. "I'm going to let Emily choose," Mrs. Grace corrected, "but now she knows all the risks." Emily looked around, at the children she already loved as if they were her own, at the house that was beginning to feel like home, at the man who had become the center of her universe in a matter of days. The choice seemed obvious, but the consequences were terrifying. "And if I choose to stay, and something goes wrong," she asked, "if we can't control the gift, if I end up like my mother and Isabella, then at least you will have lived," Robert replied, and there was an intensity in his voice that made her tremble. "At least you will have known true love, even if for a short time." Michael approached and held Emily's hand. "Mom told us you would teach us to be happy again. She said you would heal Dad and take care of us like a real mother. And she said you would be much stronger than she ever was," Anna added, "because you had something she didn't have." "What?" Emily asked. "An entire family to protect you," the girl answered with that disconcerting wisdom. "Not just Dad, us too, Mrs. Rose, Mr. Jack, even Grandma Grace. We'll all take care of you." Emily looked at Mrs. Grace, who nodded slowly. "It's true. If you stay, I'll stay too. I can't undo the mistakes of the past, but I can help ensure you have a future." The decision crystallized in Emily's heart like an absolute truth. She couldn't imagine leaving that house, those people, that man who had changed her life in a matter of days. The risks were real, yes, but the alternative, a life without love, without purpose, without the family that destiny had given her, seemed like a death in life. "I'll stay," she said, and her voice carried a conviction that surprised her. "I'll stay and face whatever comes." Robert pulled her into his arms in an embrace that seemed to try to fuse two souls into one. Emily could feel the relief emanating from him like waves of heat, and she knew he had been as terrified as she was, with the possibility of loss. "You won't regret it," he murmured against her hair. "I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe." "We will," Anna corrected, approaching to hug Emily's legs. "We're a family now." Michael joined the collective hug, and even Mrs. Grace approached, her hands hesitantly touching Emily's shoulders in a silent blessing. But as she savored this moment of family unity, Emily couldn't ignore the sensation that they were being watched. She looked over Robert's shoulder and saw a female figure standing at the window on the third floor, Isabella's studio. The figure was too far away to distinguish details, but Emily instinctively knew who it was. Isabella was watching, and for some inexplicable reason, Emily knew that the dead woman approved of her decision. Night fell over the property like a velvet mantle, bringing with it a peace that Emily hadn't felt for days. Mrs. Grace had decided to spend the night in the house, to start getting to know my new family, as she said with a smile that Emily hadn't seen in years. During dinner, the atmosphere was surprisingly warm. The children bombarded Mrs. Grace with questions about Emily's childhood, and the old lady revealed herself to be an engaging storyteller when she wanted to be. Robert observed everything with a smile that completely transformed his physiognomy, removing years of sadness from his face. "Tell us about when Emily tried to make a cake by herself at 8, asked Anna, who had instantly fallen in love with her newly discovered great-grandmother. "Ah, that was an adventure," Mrs. Grace laughed, and it was a sound that Emily had forgotten how much she missed. "She wanted to surprise me on my birthday, so she decided to make a chocolate cake. The problem is that she confused salt with sugar." As she listened to stories of her own childhood being told from a perspective she had never known, Emily realized how much she had lost because of the family secrets, how many moments of genuine joy had been suffocated by the weight of Mrs. Grace's fears. After dinner, when the children went to bed and Mrs. Grace retired to the guest room that Robert had prepared for her, Emily found herself alone with him, in the library. The fireplace was lit, creating an intimate atmosphere that made her heart race. "How do you feel?" asked Robert, serving her a glass of red wine. "Complete," Emily replied with honesty. "For the first time in my life, I feel I'm exactly where I should be." He sat beside her on the couch, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. "Even knowing the risks." "Especially knowing the risks." Emily took a sip of the wine, savoring the rich flavor that spread through her mouth. "Before coming here, I was just existing, taking care of Grandma, working, breathing, but not really living. Now I know what it's like to be truly alive." Robert looked at her with an intensity that made her blush. "Emily, you know there's still a lot we don't know about your gift, about how it will manifest. It could be dangerous." "Everything worthwhile is dangerous," she replied, turning to face him completely. "Love is dangerous, life is dangerous, but the alternative is emptiness." He extended his hand to touch her face, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw with a tenderness that made her tremble. "You are extraordinary," he murmured, "brave in a way that humbles me." "I'm not brave," Emily whispered, leaning toward his touch. "I'm terrified. But I'm also in love." The confession flowed between them like an electric current. It was the first time either of them had pronounced the word love out loud, and its weight seemed to change the very composition of the air around them. "Emily," Robert said, and his voice was hoarse with emotion, "You don't need to." "Say it," she interrupted him softly. "I know, I can feel it." "You can?" He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "It's part of the gift, I think. I can feel your feelings as if they were my own. Your pain when you talk about Isabella, your concern for the children, and—" she hesitated, blushing, "your desire for me." Robert's eyes darkened. "And what else can you feel?" "That you're afraid," she whispered. "Afraid to love me completely, because all the women you've loved died young." The precision of her perception left him visibly shaken. "How did you—" "I don't know how. I just know." Emily moved closer, her hands resting on his chest. "But I also know that your love isn't my curse, Robert. It's my strength." Before he could respond, Emily leaned in and kissed him. This time there was no hesitation or surprise, just the inevitable fusion of two people who had found their other half. The kiss deepened naturally, charged with all the passion and desperation they had repressed since their first encounter. When they finally separated, both were breathless. Robert rested his forehead on hers, eyes closed as if he were memorizing the moment. "Emily," he whispered, I want you to be mine, completely, but not here, not in this rushed way. She understood what he was saying. When they gave themselves to each other, it would be a sacred moment, not something furtive amid the fears and uncertainties that surrounded them. Then when? She asked. When you're ready, when we have time to do this right. He gently kissed her forehead. You deserve to be courted properly, not won over in the midst of traumatic revelations. His consideration made her love him even more, if that were possible. Emily nestled against his chest, listening to the accelerated rhythm of his heart. Robert, she said after a few moments, may I ask a question about Isabella? She felt his muscles tense slightly, but he nodded. Did you love her? The question hung between them for long moments. When Robert finally answered, his voice carried a brutal honesty. I thought I did. She was beautiful, talented, intelligent. We had a good life together, built a family. But now knowing you, I understand that what I felt for Isabella was comfortable, familiar, a kind of mature and stable love. He hugged her tighter. What I feel for you is completely different. It's consuming, transforming. It's as if you had lit up parts of my soul that I didn't even know existed. Doesn't that make you feel guilty? Constantly, he admitted. But Isabella knew. In the last months of her life, she told me several times that I would find true love after she was gone. At the time, I thought she was speaking generally, trying to give me permission to move on. Now I understand she was referring specifically to you. Emily processed this information, another piece of the intricate puzzle that her life had become. She planned all of this. It seems she did. The only thing she didn't plan was dying before meeting you in person. They remained embraced for a few more hours, talking about the future, about the children, about the challenges they would still face. When Emily finally went up to her room, it was almost midnight. She prepared for sleep with a lightness in her heart that she hadn't felt in years. Perhaps it was naivety, but she felt she had found her place in the world. Regardless of the risks that the gift would bring, she would face everything alongside people who loved her. But when she turned off the lights and lay down, Emily immediately felt that something was different. The air in the room seemed denser, charged with an energy that made the hair on her arms stand up. And there was an aroma in the air, the same floral perfume she had smelled in Isabella's studio. I know you're here, whispered Emily to the darkness. The silence that followed was profound but not empty. It was as if someone were holding their breath, waiting. Thank you, Emily continued, surprising herself with her own courage, for taking care of Robert and the children until I arrived, for guiding me to them. A gentle breeze moved the curtains, though all the windows were closed, and for an instant Emily could swear she saw a female figure standing in the corner of the room, smiling with approval, before vanishing like smoke. She fell asleep peacefully, lulled by the certainty that she was no longer alone in the world. She had a family, a love, and even a spiritual guardian watching over her well-being. The future was still uncertain, replete with challenges and dangers that she was just beginning to understand. But for the first time in her life, Emily Sanders Sullivan was ready to face anything that destiny had in store for her. 6 weeks had passed since Emily and Robert's engagement, and the Sullivan property had transformed into a cauldron of matrimonial preparations and supernatural discoveries. Emily woke each morning with the sensation that she was living a life that belonged to someone else, a better version of herself that she had never dared imagine existing. Her powers had grown exponentially, manifesting in increasingly surprising and powerful ways. On the morning of a golden Thursday in May, Emily was in Isabella's studio, which had become her personal sanctuary to explore her abilities. The paintings of the deceased artist seemed to vibrate with their own energy when she was present, and Emily had discovered that she could literally converse with Isabella through the canvases, receiving advice and guidance on how to navigate her new world. "You're worried about something," said Emily to Isabella's most recent self-portrait, where the artist appeared serene and luminous, free from the melancholy that had marked her last years of life. The response came not in words, but in images that flowed directly into her mind. Emily saw flashes of dark cars approaching the property, men in suits with strange instruments, and a general sensation of imminent danger. "They're coming," whispered Emily, and she felt an icy chill run down her spine. She ran downstairs to find Robert, who was in the office reviewing the final details of the wedding scheduled for the following week. When she burst through the door, clearly agitated, he immediately abandoned the papers and stood up to receive her. "What happened?" he asked, taking her by the shoulders and studying her pale face. "Isabella showed me something. People coming? Here, dangerous men with strange equipment." Emily tried to organize the fragmented visions into something coherent. "I think they're those people your mother mentioned, the ones who hunt people like me." Robert's face hardened instantly. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. And they're close. Very close." Robert picked up the phone and dialed quickly. "Mother, it's Robert. We need to activate the emergency protocol now." A pause. "Yes, they found Emily." While he spoke, Emily felt a familiar and comforting presence. Isabella was there, not visible, but definitely present, enveloping her in a sensation of maternal protection. "What should we do?" Emily asked when Robert hung up. "First, gather the entire family in a safe location. The house has a reinforced basement that Isabella had built specifically for emergencies like this." Robert was already moving, taking keys from a safe hidden behind a bookshelf. "Second, trust you. Your powers are stronger than any technology they might have. But I barely know how to control them yet." "Emily." Robert turned to face her, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. "You are much more powerful than you imagine. And you're not alone. You'll never be alone again." The sound of tires screeching on the asphalt of the driveway alerted them that time had run out. Robert looked out the window and saw 3 black cars approaching the main house. "Go get the children and Mrs. Grace," he said, his voice taking on a tone of command that Emily had never heard before. "Mrs. Rose knows where the safe basement is. I'll entertain them." "No," Emily said firmly. "I won't let you face them alone." "Emily?" "No," she repeated, and her voice carried a new, powerful authority. "We're a team. We face this together." They heard imperative knocks on the main door. Mrs. Rose appeared in the office, clearly nervous. "Mr. Robert, there are men outside asking to speak with Emily. They don't seem friendly." "Rose, take the children and Mrs. Grace to the safe. Place that Mrs. Isabella showed you now." Robert turned to Emily. "Are you sure about this?" "I am," she replied, and surprised herself with her own courage. "It's time to discover what these powers are really for." They went down together to the main room, where they found 3 middle-aged men dressed in identical dark suits. There was something disturbingly uniform about them, as if they were products from an assembly line. The leader, a bald man with small, cold eyes, smiled when he saw Emily. "Miss Sanders," he said, and his voice was oily, artificial. "Or should I say Miss Sullivan? We know about the engagement. Congratulations." "Who are you?" Robert asked, positioning himself slightly in front of Emily. "We are representatives of an organization that takes interest in people with unique talents," replied the man. "We're here to make a proposal to Miss Emily." "I'm not interested," Emily said immediately. "You haven't even heard our offer," said another of the men, removing a metallic briefcase and opening it to reveal equipment that seemed taken from a science fiction film. "We can teach you to fully control your powers, give you access to resources and knowledge that no family can offer." "In exchange for what?" Robert asked, his distrust clear. "Occasional services," the leader replied vaguely. "Consultations, nothing too demanding." Emily felt a wave of negative energy emanating from the men. There was something deeply wrong with them, something that made every supernatural instinct she possessed scream alerts. "The answer is no," she said firmly. The leader's smile became more predatory. "I'm afraid it's not a choice, Miss Sullivan. People with your gifts are too valuable resources to be wasted in a mundane domestic life." It was then that Emily felt something fundamentally change within her. A cold and powerful anger began to grow in her chest, fueled not only by her own indignation, but by decades of pain from all the Sullivan women who came before her. She could feel Isabella's presence intensifying, and beyond her, other female presences. Generations of women from her lineage who had died young, who had been misunderstood, who had never had the chance to use their gifts to protect those they loved. "Leave," said Emily, and her voice carried echoes of power that made the windows of the room vibrate slightly. "Leave now." "I'm afraid we can't do that," the leader replied, signaling to his companions. They began to remove more equipment from the briefcase, something that looked like a scanner coupled with a tranquilizer dart gun. That's when Robert moved, placing himself directly between Emily and the men. "You'll have to go through me first." What happened next was as if the very fabric of reality had decided to protect the love that had blossomed in that house. Emily felt an explosion of power flow through her, magnified by Robert's proximity, amplified by the love they shared, and directed by the protective fury of all the women of her lineage. The lights of the house flickered, and then intensified to a blinding brightness. The men's equipment began to emit sparks and fail. The plants visible through the windows began to grow visibly, as if months of growth were being compressed into seconds. "Impossible," murmured one of the men, observing their instruments fail. "Completely. You don't understand," said Emily, and her voice now carried ethereal harmonies as if angelic choirs were speaking through her. "This place is protected, this family is protected, and I'm not just a woman with supernatural gifts. I am the heir of generations of power, anchored by true love and protected by the spirits of all who came before me." The air in the room became thick and electric. Emily could see, really see, the spectral presences of her ancestors materializing around the room. Isabella was directly behind her, ghostly hands resting on her shoulders. Her mother, Hope, was on her right side, smiling with pride. And there were others, an entire lineage of powerful women who finally had a descendant capable of using their gifts to protect instead of being destroyed by them. "Mr. Sullivan," the leader tried one last time, clearly disturbed by what he was witnessing. "You don't understand the risks of keeping a person like her without proper supervision." "I understand perfectly," Robert replied, and Emily felt a wave of love and admiration flow from him toward her. "And I choose these risks with joy." It was then that Emily knew exactly what to do. She extended her hands and flowers began to sprout from the wooden floor of the room, growing rapidly until they formed a protective circle around her and Robert. The flowers were impossible, roses that glowed with their own light, jasmine that sang softly, lilies that emanated a fragrance that calmed the heart and clarified the mind. "This is my answer," said Emily, and her voice was now purely her own, but loaded with a confidence that hadn't existed before. "I'm not a resource to be exploited. I am a free woman in love and protected by forces that you don't even begin to understand. And if you try to take me by force, you'll discover that true love is the most powerful magic that exists." The three men looked at each other, clearly out of their depth. Their equipment continued to fail. The house seemed to be vibrating with protective energy, and Emily radiated a power that was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. "This isn't over," the leader said finally, beginning to retreat toward the door. "Yes, it is," an authoritative voice said at the entrance of the room. Victoria Sullivan entered majestically, followed by two other women that Emily didn't recognize, but who clearly possessed the same aura of controlled power. "Gentlemen, you are on private property, threatening members of a very old and very well-connected family. I suggest you leave immediately." "Mrs. Sullivan," the leader tried to regain some control of the situation. "The organization I represent has legal authority." "Not on this property," another of the women interrupted. Emily recognized in her the cousin from Vermont that Victoria had mentioned. "This land has been under special protection for more than a century, and Emily is under our personal protection. Besides," the third woman added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "do you really want to antagonize a family that has direct connections to the spiritual world? Consider the complications that could bring to your personal lives." As if to emphasize the point, a cold breeze swept through the room, despite all the windows being closed. The spectral figures around Emily became momentarily more visible. their eyes fixed on the intruders with disturbing intensity. The three men beat a hasty retreat, packing their defective equipment and leaving the house with a rush that would have been comical if the situation weren't so serious. When the sound of the cars moving away finally disappeared, Emily felt the supernatural energies gradually calm down. The flowers she had made grow remained but stopped glowing. The spectral presences slowly faded, but not before she felt each of them touch her softly in blessing and approval. "My God," murmured Robert, observing her with awe. "Emily, you were extraordinary." "We were extraordinary," she corrected him, taking his hand. "I felt your strength protecting me the whole time. Without you, I would never have been able to safely channel so much power." Victoria approached, her face shining with pride. "Now I understand why Isabella was so certain about you. You're not just a Sullivan with supernatural gifts. You are the Sullivan who will break the cycle of tragedy that has pursued our family for generations." "What do you mean?" "All the women before you were consumed by their powers because they used them alone, isolated, trying to carry burdens that were too big for one person," explained the cousin from Vermont. "But you have something they didn't have." "What?" Robert smiled, gently kissing her hand. "A true partner. Someone who not only accepts your gifts but amplifies and protects them. And an entire family willing to support you," Victoria added, "including the spirits of those who came before." The weeks that followed passed in a blur of final preparations for the wedding and intensive training with the three women that Victoria had brought. Emily discovered that her powers were even more extensive than anyone had imagined. She could heal sick plants with a touch, calm wild animals with her presence, and even influence the local weather when her emotions were particularly intense. But, more important than any specific ability, was the discovery that her powers were stable and controllable when she was emotionally balanced and surrounded by love. Robert wasn't just her emotional anchor, he was literally a conductor who channeled and focused her energy in ways that kept her safe. "It's symbiotic," explained the specialist from Vermont during one of the training sessions. "You two complete each other not only emotionally but energetically. It's extremely rare and absolutely beautiful." The morning of the wedding dawned golden and perfect, as if the universe itself was celebrating the union. Emily woke in the room that had been her home for months, but that she would leave that night to move to the master suite she would share with Robert as his wife. The dress had been a surprise from Victoria, a vintage creation of silk and lace that had belonged to Robert's great-grandmother, modified to fit Emily's body perfectly. When she looked at herself in the mirror, assisted by Anna and Mrs. Grace, she felt like a princess from a fairy tale. "You look beautiful," said Anna, who would serve as maid of honor, along with Michael as ring-bearer. "Mum would be very happy." "She is happy," Emily replied softly, feeling Isabella's warm presence surrounding her like a tangible blessing. The ceremony was held in the gardens, under an arch of roses that Emily had made grow specifically for the occasion. The number of guests was small, just the immediate family and a few close friends, but the atmosphere was charged with magic and love. Robert waited for her at the improvised altar, dressed in a tuxedo that made him look even more like a fairy. Tail prince. When their eyes met, Emily felt that familiar electric connection but amplified by the significance of the Amant. The priest, a young and progressive man whom Victoria had known through her ecclesiastical connections, conducted the ceremony with a sensitivity that recognized both the traditional aspects and the unique aspects of their union. "Robert and Emily," he said when they reached the vows, "you are a unique couple, united not only by human love, but by connections that transcend the physical world. Your vows, therefore, should reflect not only your promises to each other, but your commitment to use your unique gifts for the good of your family and community." Robert spoke first, his voice clear and firm. "Emily, you brought light to my life when I thought I would live forever in darkness. I promise to protect you and your gifts, support your dreams, and be your partner in all the adventures that our combined powers will bring. I promise to love not only the woman you are, but also the supernatural strength you carry, and do everything in my power to ensure that you use your gifts with joy, not with fear." Emily felt tears spring to her eyes when it was her turn. "Robert, you taught me that my gifts are not a curse, but a blessing that can be used to protect and nurture those I love. I promise to use my powers to keep our family safe, to bring healing where there is pain, and to build a future where our children can grow up knowing they are loved unconditionally. I promise to be your partner, your equal, and your anchor in any storm we may face." When they exchanged rings, simple gold bands that Emily had blessed with a small magic, so that they would always bring them back to each other if they were separated, a gentle breeze swept through the gardens, carrying the aroma of all the flowers on the property and creating a delicate rain of colorful petals. "I pronounce you husband and wife," said the priest with a radiant smile. "You may kiss." The kiss they shared was more than a romantic celebration. It was a complete fusion of souls, energies, and destinies. Emily felt all her powers align perfectly with Robert's, creating a harmony that was both deeply personal and cosmically significant. When they separated, they were literally glowing with a soft golden light that made all those present sigh in admiration. The flowers around them seemed to double in size instantly, and a family of butterflies appeared from nowhere to dance around the newly married couple. The reception was intimate and joyful, held on the main terrace of the house, under fairy lights that Emily had made glow with real magic. During dinner, Victoria rose to make a toast. "To Emily and Robert," she said, raising her champagne flute, "who prove that true love not only overcomes all obstacles, but transforms them into steps towards something greater and more beautiful. May your lives together be long, happy, and full of magic. To the magic of true love," the entire table repeated in unison. Later that night, when all the guests had departed and the children were sleeping, Emily and Robert walked alone through the gardens illuminated by the moon. It was their first night officially as husband and wife, and Emily felt a delicious anticipation growing inside her. "How does it feel being officially a Sullivan?" Robert asked, stopping near the lake where they had shared so many significant moments. "Like I finally know who I really am," Emily replied, leaning against him. "And you? Any regrets?" "Just one," he said, echoing his response from weeks before. "Regret that we can't live this night forever." Emily laughed, turning in his arms to face him. "Who says we can't? With the powers we have, with the love we share, perhaps we can create our own kind of eternity. And how would we do that?" In response, Emily concentrated and allowed her magic to flow freely for the first time since the wedding. The garden. Around them began to glow softly, the flowers opening in a silent symphony of colors and aromas. The moon seemed to intensify, bathing everything in a silver light that transformed the common world into something absolutely enchanted. "Like this," she whispered, kissing him deeply. When they separated, Robert smiled with that expression of awe that she had learned to love. "Mrs. Sullivan, you are absolutely extraordinary." "Mr. Sullivan," she replied with a mischievous smile, "you haven't seen anything yet." They walked hand in hand back to the house where a new life awaited them, a life built on true love, genuine magic, and the promise that, together, they could face any challenge the future might bring. As they climbed the stairs to their new shared bedroom, Emily felt one last familiar presence. Isabella was standing at the top of the stairs, clearer and more radiant than ever, smiling with maternal approval. "Thank you," Emily whispered, and saw Isabella gently wave before disappearing in a shower of golden light. In the master suite, transformed with fresh flowers and scented candles, Emily and Robert finally gave themselves completely to each other. Their physical union was as magical as everything else in their life together, a dance of love and power that connected them at levels that transcended the merely human. Later, lying entwined under silk sheets, Emily observed the moon through the open windows and smiled with a happiness that seemed too big for her body to contain. "Robert," she whispered. He murmured sleepily, kissing her hair. "I love you. Unconditionally, eternally, magically." "I love you too," he replied, holding her tighter against him. "Forever." And when they finally fell asleep, their dreams merged into a shared vision of the future, a house full of children's laughter, gardens that flourished under Emily's loving touch, architectural projects created by Robert that seemed to grow organically from the earth, and decades of love that only deepened with time. Emily Sanders Sullivan had found her place in the world, not just as a woman with extraordinary gifts, but as a wife, mother, guardian of a unique family, and architect of a future where magic and love walked side by side. The girl who had grown up believing that her purity was all she had to offer, the world had transformed into the woman who discovered that her true power was in her capacity to love without limits, fiercely protect those who mattered, and use her gifts to create beauty and healing, where before there had been only pain and loneliness. And when dawn finally came, painting the sky with golden and rosy tones, Emily woke knowing that each day of her new life would be a magical adventure, shared with the man who had become not only her husband, but her soulmate in every sense of the word. The future stretched before them like an infinite garden of possibilities, and Emily Marie Sanders Sullivan was ready to cultivate it, with all the love and magic that her heart could contain.